or button. There we go. Oops. All right. So this is one of those lectures where I'm going to talk about a few topics that may not actually seem to be related, but they are. So let's get started. What am I going to talk about today? So I'm going to go over components a bit and mapping. We did a little bit of that last time with our Mortitron app. Then we'll talk about hooks and how they're used in React. Talk about some pure functions. And then the majority of the time we're going to spend talking about useEffect. And then finally, at the end, we'll do some data fetching. So let's get started. So got to find the right notes. I was about to use last week's notes, and wait a minute, I taught this already. So components, why do we use components? How about rather than me answer that question, I'll have one of you answer that question. Why are components a good idea?
For reusability.
Reusability, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. That's a good one. So you may have heard of the concept of separation of concerns. And up until very recently, separation of concerns had meant put your HTML tags in your HTML document, put your styling in a CSS document, put your JavaScript in a JavaScript document, because those are different concerns. In React, however, we sort of combine all of those into each separate component. So each component can stand by itself. So if I pull a component out of one app and put it into another app, as long as it receives the same props, it's going to display the same information. And that is a very powerful part of React. I am actually doing a refactor right now in my other job. And that's, I'm being saved by the whole components and everything being its own concern. All right. So yes, so components work independently. And when you merge them, that's how we make our apps. So let's go on to the next bit. That didn't take very long, which is mapping. Now I showed you in our Mortitron app, I'm bringing out Mortitron again, because this is the favorite app that I've written this cohort. And if we go into our app, sorry, our list of characters component, there we go, list of characters right here. You can see that we are using map. What is actually happening in lines 12 to 14? Here.
Like with every iteration, you're creating a new component, new character component?
Yeah, yeah. Remember, when you look at JSX, JSX gets translated into regular JavaScript. So the React.create component is being called here. It is then being called inside this map. And we send a list of characters into the map, and it allows us to create new components, because at the end of the day, it's just JavaScript. So this is why we've put it inside this pair of curly braces. Curly braces specify a JavaScript, help me out here. What's the word I'm looking for? fragment, and it's I'll come up with it, but it's a value, right? So JavaScript, when you run a JavaScript function, it always returns a value. In the case of this character function here, this is a function, even though it looks like HTML, it is going to output the proper HTML and put it into the DOM. So map, if you, does everybody remember how map works? Right, so if we have an array, and let me do this. Let me open up a new file. I'm going to call it map.js with 1p. All right, so I'm going to just create an array. That's the fastest way to create an array. Okay, so I've got this array. And if I want to console.log each value, how would I do that? What should I type? Anyone?
Array.map. Sorry, arr.map.
Thank you.
Parentheses.
Yeah.
And then parameter.
Okay. What are you going to call the parameter?
Number.
I like it. Okay.
And then a fat arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then some curly brackets, or actually you don't need them. Just say number, oh, sorry, console.log number. Does it have to be a return? Oh no, that is a return, I guess.
Yeah, if it's all on one line, it gets returned. So who here thinks this is going to work? Yep. Let's have a look. So I'm going to go to the terminal. And I'm just going to run this through Node. It worked. Okay. Map takes optionally a second parameter. Does anybody remember what that second parameter is?
Is it an index?
Yeah. What is the index in this case?
It's just enumeration of the items in there.
Yep. It's the location inside the array. So I could say index here. So using this console.log number index, or sorry, using number in index is important. Remember that index exists because you can use this index in the future. For instance, if we need to create a character key. So if I come back here to Mortytron in the list of characters, remember we had to have a character key. So instead of doing character.id, I could do character comma index and then just change this with index. Okay, oh, and I gotta put, I deleted character. Oh. And this will provide the same output. Here, let's and then npm Something's already running on it. Okay, that's fine. That's my day job. Everybody likes port 3000 for some reason. And there we go. So here is our Mortitron, and it's just, I can use the index instead of the ID. And if I open up the, you could see that I am not getting in my console any errors. It's fine. It's saying something about these cookies, but it has nothing to do with anything else. Okay, super. So let's go back to here. Okay, so that is map. Remember, map can take both of these. Why am I using map inside this component rather than for each?
Because for each will mutate the original array.
No. What's the difference between for each and map?
Is it because a map returns an array?
Yeah. What does for each return?
For each is just apply a condition on the individual.
It runs a function against every item in an array, but returns undefined. Whereas map runs a function and then returns a new array with all of those, with all of the previous values run through that function. So it's an important difference. So here we're running map. Why? Because we're transforming an array. What array are we transforming? We're transforming this characters array. Okay, cool. Next concept, pure functions. So we, when we're using React, and this isn't just React, this is like all through JavaScript, but we use it a lot in React. There's this concept of a pure function. A pure function is a function that does not affect anything outside of the function. And think about that. When would a function change something outside of itself?
When it changes a global variable or prints something like to the console.
Yep, exactly. So let me come here to this pure.js file. Again, this is just regular JavaScript. I'm going to separate out the different concepts. Okay. So you'd think I'd have this ready. Okay, 1 second. Right. So let me create a function. Okay, I'm going to create and I'm going to do this. Is this a pure function?
Yes.
Yes. I am passing in all of the parameters here that this function is going to need in order to run any operations. It does not reach outside of itself to affect anything else. Let's have a look at a slightly different What about this? Is this pure or not?
No,
It is not pure. Why is it not pure?
because it's changing the variable num2.
Exactly. Num2 lives outside of this function, and therefore we are reaching outside of it. Therefore, this is an impure function. Let's do another one. One of the, actually typing out the name of a number, it's super weird. What about this one? Is this pure?
I would say that because the console log is in there, it contaminates the function.
Yeah. Yeah. So think about this. I mean, we've all done console.log a million times, but in reality, what is console.log? Well, what is console? Console is an object that lives in the DOM of the browser and has a number of methods associated with it, just like any other object. Let's actually have a look. Let's go to this. If I actually type console here, it returns to me an object that has all of these functions associated with it. I don't even know what some of these do. I've never used most of them. Function dir XML. Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I do know what all of these do now that I look at them. So console is an object just like any other object. So any object we can create can also exist already in whatever environment. Remember that console does live in Node, but it's different in Node. Console is associated with the DOM inside a web browser, but inside Node, it is associated with what's called the global object. Okay. All right, so returning or just remember that a pure function must take in everything that it's going to affect. So if I pass num2 into here or as a parameter, then it becomes pure. But num2 lives outside this add3. In React, every functional component is a pure function. Let's have a look at our character component, right? So let's have a look at this. Function character, we're passing in an object that has 3 children, or 3 properties, I should say. It has inside of it this handle click, and it's returning this. Remember, this is not HTML, it's JSX. What's JSX? It's a series of nested React.create element. This takes in everything that it needs and creates what it needs out of that. So it takes in all the parameters of whatever it needs in order to create the component, the individual component, And this is why this is reusable. So when I created this component, I just passed in data and it created all of these separate components inside the app. I didn't have to write a new component for each of these. I'm reusing this component several times. Okay. Okay. All right, next on my list is hooks. Hooks. Does anybody know what a hook is in React?
The state?
So the state is actually a hook. It is a way to deal with side effects inside of React components. So let's have a look at our app. This app has this hook. This hook is the use state hook. Saying is the piece of state. Saying, I'm passing it to all of these components, but this is how we are dealing with the data, right? So the data itself lives inside the app component and gets passed to the children as individual components. So first comes Rick, then comes Morty, then comes Summer, and so on. So that is a hook. There are many other hooks, and there's a few rules about hooks. The first is that when you use a hook, it must be at the top level of a React functional component like this. You can't nest it inside another function. So if I created I can't put this const saying set state saying in here. All right, I'm going to remove this in a moment, but we can't do this. We can't, because we need to keep it at the top level of the component that needs it. So I can still use hooks inside any of these child components. But if you are creating other functions that you want to run inside your component, then you need to keep your state outside of it, or your hooks, I should say. So that's the number one rule. It's called every time a component renders, every hook is called once. So use state is called once for this particular instance of this component. There's only ever going to be one app component in this application, so that's not a big deal. But just be careful when you're thinking of all these child components. If you are using state or you are using a hook inside here, just remember that it's going to run once. And finally, it's not really a rule. You can write your own components, although I'm not going to go sort components. You can write your own hooks. I'm not going to go there today, but you can do that. But if you see a method with the word use in it, that's a good indication that that is a hook. So use state is the number one used hook. Right. Super. So let's get to the next part, which is use effect. Use effect is the second most used hook after use state. what do we want to do with use effect? Sorry, 1 second. So let's come, yeah, there we go. So let's create a new component for Mortytron. Since I already have this app here, it makes sense to me at least to create a new component. So let's do that. React hook names must start with the word used. There we go. It didn't like, see, it complained to me. It wouldn't even render when I tried to mess up the rules. So let me come and fix this just by, if I should save this, it should, yep, there we go. All right, let's create a new component. I'm going to create a component and I'm going to call this component super exciting. I'm going to call it counter. Okay. So I have this component. This is just my my boilerplate for a functional component. Great. Let's pull it into the app. Oh, and let's also just rename this to counter.jsx. Okay, super. So I now have this new component. Let's actually render it. Okay, let's render it just under the title. And above occurred in div. What did I break? I broke something. There we go. Just had to say that. Okay, great. So, and you can see the counters here. Okay, so let's actually have our counter do something. Okay, so I'm going to remove the word counter here. I'm going to turn this into a React fragment. Okay, and inside the fragment, I want to create, let's do H2. And I'm just going to say, actually, let's just put it here. I'm going to say counter. Okay, so I'm erroring because counter doesn't exist. So let's create a variable called counter. Actually, we'll make it a let. Great. And it works. Perfect. Okay, so we've got a counter component. Now I want to have a way of doing something with that component. I want the counter to go up when I click on a button. So let's create a button. We'll say, we're going to have our button called increment. Super exciting. All right, maybe not. And I'm going to attach a listener onto this button just by doing on click. No, click capture, just click. right, so I want to run something whenever click is updated or when I click on the button. Let's put, let's do that. So it's rendering, so it looks valid. What does counter plus plus do?
Adds one.
Yeah, adds 1 to the counter. So the counter starts at 1. And when I click on this, it should go to 2, right? It's not. Why is it not incrementing? It should increment. The click is occurring. And that is because if you have data within a React application, we need to put it somewhere where React can get a hold of it, which is called the state. Either the state or the props, but where it initializes the state. So let's change this. How would I change this counter into to use state?
We need to first import use state.
Yep, thank you. If I okay. Super counter is not defined. That's fine because I commented it out. All right, so how do I define counter with state?
You do const and then in brackets, square brackets, you could do counter and set counter equals use state 0.
Yep. I'm going to set it to use state 1 just to have it work. I've got an error. Oh, right. And it doesn't, so having another error though, why is this error occurring?
You have to import fragment, no? From React?
No.
If you're using a fragment?
You don't.
No? Oh, okay.
You don't, but that's fair. I love using fragments like this. So I can't directly affect the counter. If I want to change counter, I need to use this set counter. Okay, so let's go and change this to set counter. So set counter, and what am I going to set it to? Let's try counter plus plus. Does that make sense? Okay, still not happy with me. Let me refresh. Invalid assignment to const counter. Okay, oh, so plus plus actually increments the, this is a case where I actually have to do a +1. Okay, and all right, now I'm getting this weird error, too many re-renders. React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop, which is telling me I think I just created an infinite loop. Thank you, React, for not freezing my browser. If you ever do create an infinite loop that's not caught by something like React, your machine will slow down. It doesn't matter how powerful it is, because it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So what's happening here? Why is this not rendering? let's think about it. What is my favorite definition of a function?
It should return something.
Yeah. So when we run a function, it gets replaced with the value that it's returned by, or it gets returned from that function. So we are setting onClick equals set counter, counter plus 1. This is then retriggering set counter, counter plus. Basically, we're just infinitely updating set counter, right? So I don't actually want to run this function immediately, which is what's happening. Set counter, counter plus 1 is running immediately. It's then updating the state, and because the state is updating, a re-render occurs. Re-render occurs, the counter has changed, set counter is run, 1 is added to the counter, a re-render occurs, and so on until the end of time, or the end of the RAM on my machine. So what I need to do here is put this inside an anonymous function. I could put it inside an external function as well. So this is valid. And let's just make sure everything works. It does, yay. I could also put this function here. Sorry. Oh, I cannot type to save my life today or ever. And then I can, instead of putting this here, I could just say update counter. Notice that I'm not invoking it immediately by putting in a pair of parens like this. I don't want it to immediately invoke because I get the same problem I had last time. So now I am passing in the update counter into this in order to update it. So let's make sure it still works. It does. You know, even refresh. Great. Super. All right. There is another way for me to do this. Right, so I've done this increment. Let's start using the use effect hook. All right. All right, so use effect is a function. This function runs when the component is rendered once. That's the rule of hooks. So this is going to run once. Okay, so this is how we deal with side effects. So let me just create a side effect. Okay, so I'm going to say use effect, and use effect takes a function, and in that function I am going to say, I'm going to run here. Just say, we'll say counter, or not counter a string. We'll use this there. So now, document.title, what effect does document.title have? When you change the document.title, what changes on a web page?
The top tab.
Yeah, the name right here. So you can always change the name of the tab. Let's have a look. Oh. So this is running every time the component re-renders. And when the component re-renders, my number has incremented. How cool is that? Are there any questions? You guys,
So use,
you go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Who's you?
Who?
So use effect is not linked to the button.
No. Use effect is linked to the component rendering. Right, so the life cycle of the component, there's a, when we instantiate the component, it renders, and then once it renders, it fires that function. So let's refresh this. And if you have a look very quickly when I do the refresh, you can see it says React app for just a brief second before it goes to :1. So the default title is there, and then we overwrite it with the counter. When we update the counter, the component is re-rendered, and therefore this counter is updated. How cool is all that?
Very cool.
I think so. Okay, speaking of cool, why don't we take a break for the next 12 minutes? How do people feel about that? Because I still got lots to do. And breaks are important. Expression.
Yeah.
what does use effect do?
Well, I know it's going to impact state, but I don't know what the specific, like,
Well, it doesn't necessarily impact state. Look at this right here. This use effect
yeah,
is
well, it's changing the document title. Yeah.
right. But that's not changing the state. The state is only changed when we run set counter.
Oh, it's actually imparting, I guess a better way to say it, it would allow you to impart the state on an element.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
if that's a good
It's
definition.
closer. We use effect. We one of those weird JavaScript things where you use. Anyways, use effect allows us to apply side effects because normally our functions or our components are pure functions. So we need to have a way to hook in and create side effects. And that's what we're doing here with use effect. Okay.
Hey, John, I have a quick question.
Go for it.
So this use effect, so it's like, it's like depend on some other state, so it will use that?
So I put counter equals $counter. I could have put, or sorry, document.title equals this. I could have put something that wasn't state related. I could say, I don't know.
I mean, like, can we put this like, we can put this document.title equals to this value inside the update counter also, right? To do the same
yes,
thing?
if that's how we wanted to deal with it.
Okay.
Let me give you another example. Thank you, by the way, for the segue. That was really smooth. It's as if we planned it that way. So here's another example. First of all, you can have multiple use effects. And you may be wondering, well, why would I want to? And I'll show you. Okay, so I've got use effect here. And this time I want to set interval. What does set interval do?
it'll take a callback and an interval like time in millisecond to perform that. After every that millisecond, it will do that thing.
I'm going to have this use effect say, okay. What's it complaining about? Okay, never mind. Okay, so let's just clean this up a little bit. Great, and I got to pass in a time in milliseconds. Let's say 3,000 milliseconds for 3 seconds. Okay, and crate is not a function. Well, it could be. Where do I have crate? Create is not a function. Oh, what's going on? It's saying the count is 1 a million times. Let's refresh. So yeah, it did crash. The above occurred. Create is not a function inside the counter component. Use effect, blah, 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 blah.
Do we have to put set interval into a function definition?
Ah, yeah, thank you. Or do we? No, we don't. No, we don't. So let me just have
'Cause
a look.
it's being called right now as opposed to defined.
It is being called, it's being called, I'm setting an interval. That's right. Yeah. That's right. You are correct, sir. There. No, you're right. So it was setting multiple intervals. It's setting an infinite number of intervals. One of those infinite loops things. Don't do those. Okay, so let's have a look. This is interesting. It's still repeating the count is 1 over and over and over and over again. Really, I just want this to happen once. So there is something I can actually do here, and that is use effect or has a second parameter, which is, oh, sorry, it's not a parameter. Sorry, it is. When you have a return function inside a user state, this is going to be a cleanup function. And what do I mean by cleanup? Well, set interval here is something that's just going to run forever until the page is reloaded. So what we want to do is we want to set up, just say const interval equals that interval. And everybody hates me. All right, maybe not, but I'm just, I do test things before I come out here, I promise. Let's just go back until things are working. Unexpected token. Okay, right. So I'm inside a user. Oh, right. This is what I need to do. Yeah. Yes, and I know I've done it already, but. Right, so inside the use effect, then I create a callback which runs, right? So inside this callback, I could put this set interval. There we go. And what I'm going to do, this is one of, I'm getting confused because there are multiple callbacks here. All right. So what I can do here, yeah, everything's working again. And I'm still, that's kind of funky. Oh, I'm getting 350. That's something I want to fix. So let's fix that. So when you set a variable equal to the output of the set interval, here, comma, 3000, there we go. Then we can actually run a cleanup. And let me show you what that looks like. So two things. The first thing is that use effect. We're going to right. So the cleanup here looks like and put it in here. There we go. Okay. So when you put a return inside a use effect, the return is actually used as a cleanup function. And okay, so I'm no longer getting the infinite code update. So let's refresh one more time. Let's increment. Everything is incrementing properly. The console.log is not occurring. Interesting. Right, so this is a function that's run. This has got to be, there we go. That's more like it. And increment. There we go. And even though I'm updating it, that
John, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go
Can you
for it.
just talk to me again about, can you just define use effect and what, again, what its purpose?
Use
Like,
effect
why we
allows
would
us,
apply it? Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
allows us to, this is one of those weird things where you're not going to understand why it's useful until you use it. Use effect allows us to deal with side effects. In this case, the side effect is updating the title of the counter here. I didn't have to do it that way, but I did.
But can you explain the side effects? Like,
Mhm.
because I'm not really understanding.
Well, console.log is a side effect.
Right.
Okay, setting the document.title, that's a side effect. Why is it a side effect?
Yeah, that's my question. Because that's what
Side
you wanted
effect-
to, that's what you wanted to do, right?
That's what I want it to do, but document.title does not live inside this component. It lives in another object. What's that object called? Document. What's the property that we're interacting with? we're interacting with the title property of the document object. The document is not passed in to this counter. I could still access it because it's accessible from the global scope, because everything in the global scope is available to, doesn't matter what closure you're in, that's the top level scope. So here we do have access to document.title. We're going to run this use effect once. So does that help?
No, I think it's more of a what you were just saying. I have to start using it to
Yep.
really to wrap my head around it right
Absolutely.
now. There's too many things
Absolutely.
talking to each other right now. So
Yes, there's a lot of stuff happening here. Absolutely. Okay.
Basically, it's just running a function, right? You can just put any kind of function in there, and it doesn't have to return anything.
Yeah, inside the use effect. Matter of fact, if it does return something, it's gonna confuse things, because it's expecting to return a function that is going to clear the interval. It's going to clear, or in this case, it's going to clean up what we've set up. So interval here is going to be running forever. However, so this counter is going to continue happening, but I've cleaned it up, which means that I've run it once, and then it returns once, and that return is run. And what happens is we clear this interval. So I've set this interval here, and I've cleared this interval here, which is why count is 2, the count is 16. That's what's happening. The next part of use effect is dependencies. And this is a list, or an array, I should say, of things that it's going to look at. Okay. So here, matter of fact, I'm getting this great error. React hook use effect has a missing dependency counter. Either include it or remove it from the dependency array. So I'm using counter. Counter is within this, the scope of this function. So let me add it there. And if I come back here, still saying the count is 16. It's saying the count is 17, right? Because I clicked on the button once, it re-rendered. What happens when a component re-renders? The use effect is fired. What happens when this use effect is fired? This interval is set. Once that occurs, then the cleanup happens immediately thereafter. This is a list of things it's going to look at. So whenever counter changes, we can run use effect again. So we're now overriding the normal rule that hooks only run once. Hooks, the use effect hook runs whenever a piece of state or whatever you're passing in here changes. So when this changes, this use effect occurs. So let me here, and I'm just going to comment that out and say okay. So it will now console.log every time, well, it's going to do it once on page load, and then every time, and you'll see this number is, hold on, I get to use my cool new tool here. Use an arrow, right? There we go, that counter right there. That counter is incrementing every time I change this. Okay, so this allows us to look, again, it's a side effect, right? We want something to occur when something within the function or the functional component is updating. Okay. There is a really good use for this. So let's actually go back into our list of characters component. Okay, we've got this component that we wrote yesterday, or last week, I should say, where it's going to pull a list of characters, or it's setting the list of characters equal to this data that I'm importing. Let's say I don't want to import that data though. Instead of pulling in this data, and it's crashing because data is not defined, that's fine. Let's actually set the data. Here, tell you what, we'll just delete. We'll turn that into an empty array. Okay, and our Mortytron works. We don't have a list of characters. Now, remember last week I said I got that from the Rick and Morty API, so let's go. Let's go there, Rick and Morty API. Okay, super. So this is the Rick and Morty API. Let's look at the docs very quickly. Okay, it's got a GraphQL endpoint. I don't want to deal with that right now, but we do have all of this. Great. So let's make a get. All right. So that's the URL I need to worry about. So I want to populate the characters with an actual network call. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use effect in order to implement that. So let's do that. Okay. Super. So let's pop this in here. Use effect. I want to run the I want this to run, requires an effect callback. Yes, it does, doesn't it? So I'm going to make a network call, and I'm going to actually use a library. So up until now, we've been using jQuery to pull in, do API calls. And that's great, except jQuery has a million pieces to it. And we only actually want the piece that does the API calls, because React does everything else for us. So there's a library that's basically just the part of jQuery that does network calls, and that is called Axios. Note that this Axios has nothing to do with the news agency Axios. I've had students in the past use the news agency Axios logo in their projects. And I have to point out that that's not the Axios that they mean. In any case, so I'm going to do an npm install Axios. Okay. All right. And I'm going to import it. Okay, so I've got Axios. So let us, inside our use effect here, use Axios. Axios dot get. And what we'll do is we'll do /characters. All right, Axios, just like the jQuery promise library, uses promises, obviously. So let's do that. So what am I going to do with the data that I get back? So I guess the first thing I want to do, because I always like looking at the data that comes back just to make sure it's in the shape that I expect it to be in. So I'm just going to say then data console.log data. Okay, so this should fire once when the page is rendered. Let's go back to Rick and Morty here. And I'm just going to clear my console and I'm going to refresh. And I've gone to the wrong endpoint. Oh, how embarrassing. So characters doesn't see. It's a good thing I did that console log. So let's go back here. Character, singular. Let's go back and change to character. And hold on. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, so let's do this again. Refresh. There we go. We've got a response to our data call to the API. So let's have a look at the API. We've got this object that comes back. It's got data, okay? And inside the data, there is something called info. I vaguely remember this from last week when we were dealing with it, right? We had two parts. We had an info part and we had a results part. So let's use this results part. Okay, so instead of doing data console.log data, I'm going to get rid of that console.log data. And instead, what should I do with the data now that I've got it back from the Rick and Morty API? How do I put this data into the app?
You put it in the state.
Yep. And I'm going to not set state. We're going to do set characters. And what are we going to send it? We're going to send it back as data here. Let's change data here to response. And then we can say response dot data dot what did it look like again? Response dot data dot results. Okay. Hey, look at that. So I'm no longer using the local version that I pulled in last week. I'm now going out into the internet. I'm grabbing the information and I'm pulling it in and using that. So except that I'm running an infinite number of times, and that's probably not good. The Rick and Morty API people are probably upset with me. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say, I'm going to pass it an array of items that I want it to look at. And I only have to actually do that without putting anything in there. And it will just run once when the page is initially loaded. So it's always a good idea to put an array here. An empty array will only happen once. If I put characters in here, it will run whenever the characters change, which in this app will be never, because I don't have a way of adding characters. So let me get rid of this infinite number. Oh, All right. Maybe I don't want it to run like that. Maybe I just want it to have run once. There we go. Much better. I have to think about why that didn't work the way I expected. Normally, when you use effect, and I'm going to send you a great article in the notes, but when we use effect, we are asking that something get run. That in this case, we're calling an external resource a side effect. When we get the data back, because it does take time for the data to come back, we then run set characters with the response.data.results. Oh, I know why it ran continuously. So when we get the response, it runs set characters. The characters update, because characters update, it's in this list of dependencies. So therefore, this fires off again and another Axios call goes out. The Axios call comes back. We run set characters again, even though it's the same characters. It sees that as a change to the state. So it reruns. So we were having that rerun an infinite number of times, which is obviously not what we want. We want to have that run once. And if we want it to run once, just send it an empty array and that will run on page reload. This is generally how you're going to use effect. You're going to put it in, it's going to run once when the page loads and probably does an external call to a resource to get information in. I understand you have a project and appointment thing. This might help with your appointment project. Matter of fact, my understanding is the appointment project actually has, what's it doing? It's running, right, you have to actually grab two different resources, if I remember correctly. And by remember, I mean, somebody told me how this works, because I've never done the project. Oh, let me just look at my appointment. Right.
I think we get it from a database, John.
Yep. But
Right,
a
we're syncing
database
up.
and an API, at the end of the day, it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, from the standpoint of a front end app, it's the same thing, because the front end of your app is not going to directly contact the database, right? The front end of your app is going to contact the back end of your app, and that will contact the database. Right? So you're still going to be using an Axios or a similar call on your back end. So your front end is going to talk to your back end to grab that information. Okay.
John,
Yeah.
can we, what happens if we just put a function outside of use effect? If we just put a function, will it also get run every time it's rendered?
So it's not quite as easy as all that. Let's actually give it a try. Use effect is generally seen as the best place to do that. I'm just going to comment out this use effect. All right. It still works.
But it's going forever.
It's going forever, right? It's going forever because the same problem we had earlier with that use effect.
So use effect, in a sense, is a tool to make a function only run once.
Yep.
Or as many
Or
times as you,
whenever something changes, but only then, and not in the case. Boy, the Rick and Morty API people are going to be really upset with me. And I do not want people who are Rick and Morty fans to be upset with me. So let me fix that quickly. All right.
So the dependency is kind of like event listener for that.
Exactly. It's listening to whatever it is you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in updating an appointment. Maybe you're just watching the appointments, or maybe you want to get information about a single appointment, or say Rick here. Have I crashed? No, maybe, hold on. Let me refresh. Everything's starting to get kind of slow and muggy on this machine. Yeah, let's just.
So you would use effect for any async calls and
Yes.
anything that's kind of async.
Yes, yes, right. So async, because async takes a while. Yeah, I've crashed my browser. This is what happens when you have an infinite loop. Oh, no, it survived. Maybe. I'm just going to quit my browser.
John, back there a while ago when this is going back before our first break, we had the on click once that event happened, but it kept doing that infinite loop. Was that literally just a syntax thing?
So
Just how we
I did that
encoded
on
it?
purpose, right? I wanted to show you that it was important to use an anonymous function there.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So
got it.
let's actually go back to our counter component, right? So we want to run update counter, but we only want to run it when we click the button. What happens if I say update counter and then that is that it will run it will run when it renders. So it will look at this. Okay, I have to render a button. Okay, I have an on click. What do I set the on click to? The results of what happens when I run update counter. So that's not what I want. I want it to actually run update counter when that occurs. Now let's see if Firefox will forgive me for, yeah, Firefox is so nice to me. Okay. All right, let me have a look at what I need to cover today, because I think, you see, the problem here is that all of my notes were in my browser and now all my browsers have closed, so hold on. Bear with me for just a moment. Right, so data fetching, dependencies, use effect, clean up. Right, so I think I have touched on everything. There is a slide that I saw one of the other teachers use, and let me see if I can find that slide here. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to steal, well, it's not stealing, right? It's the same company. If you take a stapler from your coworker's desk and put it on your desk, have you stolen that stapler? Because that stapler didn't belong to either of you. It belongs to the company. Anyways, this is the flow that you should think about when it comes to use effect. So the first thing that happens is React is rendering the user interface that you've created. It's turning the JSX into HTML. The browser then displays that HTML. There's actually a step between those two, which is React creates what's called a virtual DOM, but I'm not going to get too deeply into that right yet. So, and this is called painting. You may have heard of the term painting when it comes to rendering a web page. This is what it means. Once it renders the page physically to the browser, clean up previous effects, and then run current effects. So it's going to run the cleanup ahead of run current effects. So it's kind of important. React renders, it's shown on the UI. Once it's shown on the UI, if there's a cleanup function, it will run that, and then it will run the callback, the regular callback. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is the order in which things go when we're dealing with a React use effect, right? So in this case, we are running it. It is updating the title of the page, and that's it. A better, to be completely proper, I want to put an empty array here, and or says use effect has a missing dependency counter. Yes, I want this to run only when counter updates. That makes sense, right? When counter changes, I want this use effect to fire. So when I update this, it's firing. Now it fired before, but it also ran infinitely before. You just didn't see it run in the background. So if I remove this, yeah, if I remove the counter, no, in fact, I showed it to you here with this use effect. So if I remove that, and open up this, and use effect has fired, use effect is fired. Is it working? Quite possibly. All right. Oh, right, because it's only running once, right? So if I got rid of that and refresh. All right. I obviously need to go back and check to see what's going on there. Properly, you should always have your dependency array of things you want to monitor. In this case, I don't want to monitor anything because I only want this to fire once. It should only fire once upon the page render because that's the rule of hooks. They run once when the page is rendered. This is not re-rendering the entire page. This is just updating the counter, and therefore use effect is only going to fire once. There we go. I know what's going on. Stay away from set interval if you can, if at all possible, because it's only ever caused me heartache in the past when I've tried to use it in real projects. So just find some other way of doing it. Okay. I'm done early. First time ever. Questions, concerns, death threats? All right, maybe not the last one. No? Okay, everybody, if you have questions, ask Sean because he paid close attention and he knows exactly how use effect works.
Don't ask me anything.
He's almost a mentor.
I need much more practice coding that out to get it. It'll come. Just need a couple more weeks.
It will come. And I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. The only way you're going to become a better coder is to code more. Just keep writing code. If you have like a weird idea on a weekend and go, hey, I wonder if I could do that. Try it. What's the worst that can happen? All right, my friends. Well, I don't have anything else for you today, so I'll let you go early.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
you.
You're the best. Best class ever. Ugh, that did not go as well as I would have liked. Oh well. Oh well. C'est la vie. Mhm, 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 mhm. Mhm, mhm, mhm.